Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Shamikia Williams. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, and this is Reverb From The Heart. I'm thrilled to welcome Kellan to the show. Hey, Kellan. Kellan is queer, trans, neurodivergent, and transracial adoptee who's committed to dismantling Western structures of health and therapy. They specialize in somatic approaches, including somatic processing, embodied breathwork, and root cause therapy, which I'm very excited to hear more about. Rather than seeing trauma responses or health concern as pathologies, Kellan guides clients to understand and hold space for every part of themselves, especially fellow queer folks, adoptee, and cycle breakers. Uh, their work focused on helping people embody healing, joy, and connection, even when it feels out of reach. Above all, Kellan provides a compassionate space for processing emotions and releasing trauma stored in the body. Hey, Kellan.
Hello. You summed
Hello.
it all up there.
All of that. And I'm so happy to know that there are people who are in these spaces and people who are, like you said, having particular and specific niche to be able to guide different population of people in their healing. Anything, Kellen, that you'd like to say before we get started and provide some of these people with some information?
Well, I'd like to just say thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I hope that whoever's listening just gets something, learns something from our talk, really.
Yay. All right. So, Kellen, the first thing that I would like for you to do is to share about your personal journey that led you to somatic therapy, breath work, and talk a little bit also on root cause therapy.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the route, I guess, that led me into getting into somatics myself was actually kind of a bit random in that it didn't include like adoption, trauma. I wasn't particularly looking for healing when I kind of fell into somatics. But I got COVID and I came down with like really bad COVID fatigue just afterwards. And I'd always been like a really active person. If anything, I think before I got ill, I relied a bit too heavily on working out and things like that to kind of alleviate like stress and tension and anger. And so when I was hit with this fatigue, it was debilitating. Like I went from being really active to being like, ugh, I feel too heavy to like move and get up and do life. Um, and so I was doing nutritional therapy at the time, like studying it and practicing it. And I was doing all of these things to help my body recover, and things still weren't really getting there. Like I was still
Mm-hmm.
really. And somebody just mentioned, oh, why don't you try breath work for energy? That might help. And I was a bit of a skeptic. I was a bit like, I've been breathing all my life. Like, I'm pretty sure it can't help the surely. But I was quite desperate. So I YouTubed it, I tried it out, and I saw this breathwork video that said DMT breathing and my dimethyltryptamine. And it's sometimes called like the God chemical or like the psychedelic chemical that perhaps our pineal gland releases. And it just really intrigued me. So I started doing that, and I was oh my God, I feel energized, like my energy's coming back. And over time, the more I practice different breathwork techniques, the more my energy kind of got restored. And I then just again randomly decided to, I was like, I want to do this in person. So I signed up to a breathwork facilitation event and thought I'd kind of be learning about, different breathwork techniques, maybe get some more energy. And it was so different. It was very like embodied practice of really just it's a hyperventilation kind of
Mm-hmm.
technique. So it's sometimes called conscious connected breathing or psychedelic breath. And it can just really take us places. It's a bit like, like psychedelic therapy can be quite a journey. Um, yeah, this type of breath work can really help to let our bodies process tension and trauma that it's been holding on to, even without explicit memory of those traumas. And I think as an adoptee, it was like the missing piece that I'd really kind of been missing, basically, been
Mm.
searching for, because I'd done like talk therapies and I'd had counseling and different things, and I talked about adoption, and I'd we call it coming out of the fog, where I'd at least somewhat processed around the trauma of adoption and like how colonial it is as a multi-dollar industry. But it was like my body was still just holding on to all that stuff. And when I
Mhm.
did breath work, it was like I finally got in touch with that like young infant part of myself that was just kind of desperately still kind of screaming to
Yeah.
be heard and to be felt. And when I felt that the first time, I was like, yeah, I don't know. It felt, it just felt like something more was there. And
Mm.
yeah, ever since
Mm.
then, I've dived into somatics. I've dived into learning about the nervous system, embodied practices, and just really working with the body in the way that the body and mind want to work together, rather than, I guess, kind of what we see a lot in our very capitalist driven Western society these days,
Mhm.
where we just see the brain and the body as distinct entities almost, and we don't work with them together.
Mhm. You're able to mention how breath work can increase and inspire more energy in the body, and how you stumbled into this process just by designing energy. And you talked about working out, which was very interesting, and how working out was a way that you would. Okay, I just have working out primarily and means and forget to add the rest. But working out was your way of working on your body and working on your energy? Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I think before I got ill with COVID fatigue, it was almost like working out had become a bit of a vice for me,
Mhm.
and almost like a bit of an obsession as well. Like I previously was quite obsessive around food as well, like to the point of orthorexia, where it's like
Okay.
disordered eating, but health, like it's around being obsessed with health. And so I think exercise was like I needed control, and that was like how I controlled, like how I
Mm.
agency and control in my life. And so yeah, that being taken away was very distressing for me, not only just because I was fatigued and had brain fog and COVID fatigue, but yeah, it was like taking a big part of what I needed to cope with life away.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think this touches on something that I think I'm beginning to understand more and more, is that I've stopped seeing kind of my fatigue as something to like fight against now, and as like an enemy. But I
Mhm.
think often a lot of times, like things like fatigue and illnesses or like gut issues come along, and they're like messages from the body, and
Yeah.
it's like we can tune into those and listen to them. And actually, when we do that, we can become much healthier, more peaceful, authentic versions of ourselves through
Mhm.
not ignoring the symptoms, but diving into them and asking what we really need. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. So I love that you're talking about these steps that you're taking. And now what I'm curious about is what drew you then to focus on creating a safe space for trans adoptee, um, from that point?
Mm. I think I'd always just wanted to be in community. I think actually, if anything, that's a part of my healing, is to find just fellow people, fellow souls that are aligned and have similar lived experiences to me. Because I think as a transracial adoptee, like we don't really have that. Growing up,
Mm.
we're very disconnected from people, and we often don't have anything much in common. And I think I wanted to help people like myself. I feel I feel like I can be very attuned as well to the people to people's needs who are in my own community just through that lived experience
Yeah.
perspective. So yeah, it just felt like a natural thing for me where I think I can help the people that I feel called to be with the most really.
Yeah. So you mentioned disconnect, and I think I would like for you to talk a little bit about what disconnect means and what it looks like in like when existing in community, but not, in community.
Mm. So like existing as in like outside of community or
Yeah. Like disconnect when you were explaining earlier and feeling disconnected, right? And so
yeah,
sometimes a lot of times we can be around a lot of people and people are existing in the same space as we are, but still feel disconnected, right?
yeah,
So I
yeah,
wanted to hear from your perspective because this is your desire to create a space for those who have this experience. So what does it mean for you, or what has it looked like for you to feel disconnected
yeah.
within?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think I'm kind of very much still on my own journey with being disconnected and learning what real connection and community looks like and feels like. And I think it's almost like again kind of going back to our Western society that we live in. It's like we're kind of all living up in our heads, and it's almost like we don't have like access to our bodies and the sensations in our bodies and like what they're telling us. So as we're walking about, we're we're being people for other people rather than who we really kind of authentically are at our core, and we're doing things because that's what society says, that's conditioning. We're doing things out of fear of not belonging rather than
Mhm. Mm.
like this innate like, oh, we really want to connect because we have so much like love to give and receive. And I think connection can look like oh sorry, it's like disconnection can look like complete. Some people are just, they can't feel their body hardly at all, like they don't know when they're in pain, they don't know when they're hungry. um they may feel like laying in bed all day, and it's
Yeah.
just like there's just kind of there's no communication almost going on between what's up here and what's going on down below their neck. Dissociation some people can live in, and
Yeah.
I was very dissociated from my feelings growing up a lot. And I think it's only more recently that through processing, obviously not all of it, like, but through processing some of the trauma and the tension that I was holding in
Yeah.
my body, only now am I really starting to be able to lean into that. Oh, I know when someone's crossed my boundaries. I know what I really want to be doing. I know what I don't want to be doing. I
Yeah.
know who really feels like my kind of people and don't. Yeah,
Mhm.
being able to really connect with those people. Yeah, and yeah, that's
Yeah.
so big. I think on that
Yeah,
authentic
no.
connection.
I like that. I like that you're willing to share that connection is still something that you're learning, and
Yeah,
it's still something that you're improving awareness in, right? And so, in addition to that, when I think of even myself, if I've ever felt disconnected with people around me, it would
mm,
often even look like wanting to share something and being dismissed and being shut down, wanting to talk about the struggles that I'm facing and people dismissing them and saying like, that's not struggle. You don't know what struggle even look like.
mm,
Wanting to talk about how I feel and being like expressing like, I feel this way about this situation, and then this being becoming defensive. So it's like very hard to even open up and be vulnerable and being transparent. And then it's so easy, like what you talk about, to just like, I'm just gonna stay my little self in my room. I'm gonna
mm,
close off And then when that narrative, if we grow up long enough in narratives like that where we don't get to express ourselves, it
Mm.
then leads to how can we create that for ourselves in our own mind? And then the mind start to tell the stories of the other people that we've heard within the community. And so, yeah, I can imagine like dismantling even these thoughts just to make sure that we understand what connection deeply looks like.
Mm.
So, I love that there's so many different aspects of learning connection and recognizing when we do feel disconnected with environments and within ourselves and our bodies.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And I think for a lot of people, we say connection, but it's sometimes not so easy for people because connection, a lot of us have growing up, we learned that connection was unsafe. And so, we've got all these protective mechanisms that are keeping us from that connection. People might associate connection with abandonment and pain and being criticized. And so it makes sense that we have these ways of being that prevent that. But then, I guess the more we get into this work, the more we want to cycle break. We realize that actually they're no longer serving us. Like,
Hmm,
like,
hmm. Yeah, and I champion on because I love and I admire seeing people who are just prepared to break these cycles. So if you are out there and you are doing this work, stay strong because it's not an easy task and sometimes it's so easy to feel alone in it. Um, so, Kellen, I want to hear what are some of the unique struggles trans adoptee face, particularly in navigating the complexities of deep emotion, harsh emotion, grief that often arises in their experiences?
yeah, I mean, I feel like there are so many here, like little nuances. I mean, to start with, I think, as trans people and or adoptees, we have a hard time finding just space holders that can understand that struggle. And a lot of us have stories of like, oh, like they would have been a great therapist, but like they misgendered me, they didn't understand pronouns, or like they didn't understand transition. And then as adoptees, I myself have been to therapists that I thought were good for me, and yet they were just reiterating and kind of reinforcing this really kind of toxic idea of you were saved and like, just
What?
letting go. Yeah, like letting go of
Really?
my birth family, my first family, where obviously there's this deep attachment wound. Like you can't just, the whole in quotation marks, just let go of the past. Like that's not how
Mhm.
trauma and the nervous system work. So we have to contend with that, and yeah, so we're kind of already facing this chronic misunderstanding,
Mhm.
misalignment with people, and just navigating that in itself is can be really traumatic. Like it can be overwhelming. And then as people that have gone through different experiences, um, I think often we do have sensitive nervous systems, and I think that can change the way that certain things might work for some people. Like a lot of people come to me and they can't meditate, like at
Yeah.
all, because they just don't have the safety within their bodies to get to that point. And I used to be exactly the same. Like meditation used to kill me off. Like I was like, I cannot just sit still with my thoughts. I can now, which is a nice feeling. But it took me. I had to go like a different route to get there, and I think trans adoptees as well. We hold, I think, a really complex form of grief because I
Yeah.
think any sort of transition, even if it's the greatest thing that happened to you, any sort of change
Yeah.
represents a letting go, and we have to. It's almost like there's grief in our old lives, and perhaps the family that are or aren't supportive. There's just a lot of change,
Mhm.
and as that's just so compounded by adoption and this I'm going to say disenfranchised because our grief as adoptees is often very shut down in that people are like you're saved, it's very like it was never validated. So
No.
a lot of the time adoptees will lose everything. They'll lose their family, they'll lose their culture, their roots. They're shipped off to different countries, and then
Yeah.
it's, well, you should be grateful, and that creates so much disconnect. Um, and I think sometimes, this is quite personal to me, but I know a lot of us trans adoptees, we have a connection, I think, to our birth mums, and when we do transition and realize who we are, there's almost like this grief of, well, maybe our birth mothers don't know our gender anymore. Like, would they even recognize us? Like, maybe they thought, they have a daughter out there somewhere, and actually they have a son or somebody
Yeah.
non-binary. When I first had top surgery, that landed on me quite hard, and I was like, oh, I had so much grief that, even however unlikely it would be that I would ever find my birth mom, like if I did, I'd be like, well, she might not even recognize me as her own.
Yeah.
And it's been a journey of processing that and integrating that. And yeah, it's led me on quite a spiritual journey, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I that was a very interesting take. I'm absolutely surprised that there are people in this field that would be so dismissive of you were rescued, you were saved.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
And so and when the moment they say something like that is the moment that conversation has closed. It
Hmm.
doesn't like, when somebody says you were saved, that conversation is closed, and then that
Yeah.
person may not know how to even express it, and then they're pushed to talk about something else because it sounds like based off the therapist, it vexes me
Hmm.
because, people are coming in because they want to, if this is being brought up,
Hmm.
it's requiring, it's requesting space to be discussed, not to be cut short.
Yeah.
They already feel individuals already feel disconnected with their body. They're trying to navigate through a plethora of changes,
Mm-hmm.
and then the significant ones being dismissed. And it's very interesting that you shared something that, you know, honestly, I have not thought about. You
Yeah.
talked about when going through healing and
Mm.
then starting to think about, like, going through a transition and
Mm.
starting to think about, "Oh, when they gave birth to me, the gender was
Mm.
identified as male or female," or,
Yeah.
and getting to a point where it's like, would they even know, like, if they saw me, would they know that it's me? And
Mm.
that is a tremendous amount of grief, and that is another part of the transition that has to be processed too.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
I've never thought about that.
There's a lot of transition in transition. Yeah.
It's a lot of, 'cause, would you say that people, alright, if you've thinking about society and what it looks like, right?
Mm. Mm. Mm.
How much do people actually make space to
Mm.
discuss the emotion, the grief that
Mm.
plays around change?
Yeah. We don't do it. Like our society, it's very like, let's, like change is almost like that's what we're all meant to be like driving towards, like new year, new me. Like there's no, yeah, there's almost no acknowledgement of grieving for what could have been, what's lost, like, opportunities that maybe we were hopeful for,
Yes.
even things, and the grief for things that we never had. I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. Mm,
It's
yeah.
so yes, even the things that, because even the things that we haven't grasped or touched yet,
Mhm.
that's still maybe still in the works of being manifested, or maybe the trajectory has changed, so the goal seems a little bit, like,
Yeah.
difficult to reach. I think you're surprising me because like, and I love that we're talking about the different forms of grief, because I think
Mm,
there's a lot of people who, there's a lack of knowledge around what
mm.
grief is. A lot of people may focus on, you had something that you wanna say, Kellan?
Bereavement. Oh yeah,
Bereave
just think grief is bereavement, and that's it.
Exactly. That's it. What are you grieving about? There are people who have grown very connected to a blanket. And there's a
Mm,
significance to a blanket. It's not
yeah,
just a blanket. When you sit down, like, tell me a little bit about what this blanket means to you.
yeah.
And you will hear stories for days, you know? And I think when it comes to transitioning, when it comes to change, there's a lot of part where we can be more curious. I think sometimes we say, like, "Oh, how are you feeling? I feel bad. Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that."
Mm,
No, we just carved out, like, so much information that
mhm.
could be learned and could be understood in this process.
Yeah, yeah.
So I really like that you've touched on this. Is there anything else that you want to, mention around grief?
Um, yeah, I might just go back to the like what we never had, because I think sometimes it's the things that we never actually had that it's like we needed that the most, and like trauma
Mm,
isn't just well, it's trauma is really in the nervous system, so it's not really what happened to you. So sometimes it's literally what didn't happen to you, and again, I think that's something that people don't really understand. They're like, oh, I didn't go through this, and I didn't wasn't in a car crash. I've not been in a war. I've not
yeah,
been abandoned. But like maybe their parents and carers weren't attuned to them. That's massive. That's trauma. So yeah,
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 what we didn't have,
yeah, and
which is
or I'm sorry.
yeah,
This
no,
is
no,
I'm excited about this
yeah, no, go.
conversation. Um, yeah, because there's so much, that we have thoughts around. Our thoughts are constantly going. And even okay, I'm gonna ask you this: Are even if something did not happen, right? Or if
Mm,
it and when it does happen, if the mind interprets it as whatever the mind interprets it
mm.
as, does that still create a form of emotion in the body?
Yeah, yeah, because as human beings, and especially young minds, where everything is subconscious, everything is personal, we're meaning making beings, really. Like it's like we have to make a meaning, so we create narratives, and then we create beliefs around those narratives. So say it's yeah, primary caregiver wasn't attuned. um there's a narrative there that like, oh, that it's my fault that they're not attuned, or I'm not good enough because they weren't giving me what I needed, or I was a bad person because they
Yeah.
didn't show that they cared, or you know and so we go around with these beliefs in our system, and that creates emotions, that creates tension, it creates all the nervous system the
Yeah.
nervous system is firing off with these beliefs.
Yeah.
And yeah, those beliefs, they really dictate our lives, really. They dictate what we think we deserve, and yeah.
Mm. Mm. What we think we deserve.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good line. Thanks for saying that. Um, Kellan, can you explain how inherited intergenerational or ancestral trauma manifests in individuals, in adoptees and trans adoptees,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and how your work with these individual to assist them in recognizing and breaking these cycles for themselves and future generation?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because in terms of, inherited trauma, it's like we have the kind of passed down trauma from, say, if we're raised by someone and they have these patterns of being, and that can, create those narratives,
Yeah,
um, beliefs. But then we also have like body-based trauma that is passed down. And so it might not be necessarily that you've interacted with those people, but just the way our epigenetics work, the way our genes are turned on and off, and maybe tension is passed down in like the sacrum or the hips or something. So the trauma can be passed on behaviorally, but it can also be passed on like through the soma, like the body. And for adoptees, it's like, most people are dealing with two sets of, ancestral lineages. But
Yeah.
adoptees are dealing with probably four. um,
Yeah.
like we have, our birth mom and our dad, and then we've got our adoptive mom and our adoptive dad, and there's all that ancestral, baggage. I don't always like the word baggage, but
Yes.
things are passed down, and that's not always a bad thing. I think we gain a lot of strength from our ancestors. They as much as they give us trauma, they give us some great qualities, and they were all survivors. I think that's something that we forget as well. We're like, oh, like, damn all my ancestors for this trauma, but like, they gave you what you needed to survive.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's so interesting. I don't know. It's not my favorite book, but the Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. There's a story of a guy in that who had like massive rib pain, and there was a massive story, but it transpires that his mother broke her rib, I think, during pregnancy, and he didn't know all his life. But yeah, for all his life, he'd had this like chronic pain and tension in this rib area. And when they went in and resolved that, he'd never been able to orgasm with people. He just always felt such like unsafety, safety, not safe to kind of like be that vulnerable. And when this like body held trauma passed on from his mother was resolved and he felt safer, then it was like apparently his sex life took off because he could be vulnerable. So there you go. Like,
Wow.
yeah, so many stories like that. So many different. Yeah.
Aspects of that. No, because I'm learning, and I love to be in spaces of lessons, and to hear that story is very interesting to me
Mm,
because you know there it goes to show how important it is to hear the stories of our parents, to
mhm.
be familiar with the stories of our parents, because there are so many things that's being passed down
Yeah,
from theirs to ours in this
yeah.
existence, and then from ours to theirs. But not only that, to be disconnected from
Mm,
those parents and
mm,
not knowing or having an idea of self is a huge impact and a huge grief for
mm.
those who have been adopted, and their bodies is going their body so many things and not knowing what it all means, not
Yeah.
knowing what did their parents experience, and then now they have to engage with a new family, if that, because I don't think it's so linear, like, okay, if you lose your family then you get this new family.
Mm,
It could be like, if you lose your family you're homeless, if you lose your family you're in the like government stuff, if you lose your family you get, like, it could be any other way. I think there's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right.
And that adoptive family might also be, it might surprise some listeners, but the amount of abuse and neglect that goes on by adoptive parents and foster, it's like huge, huge. There's quite a number of adoptees that literally are murdered by their adoptive parents, and it's like, wow.
So you see, so it's such a painful journey. And I
Mm,
and like, yes, it's painful, but it's also like there's some strength that we are blessed with and we accrued over time.
mhm.
But nonetheless, it's very heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think, when we're not in close enough proximity to those who have these experience,
Mm,
we know very little, and it would be very ambitious for us to think that we know anything at all when we've never sat across somebody and had these conversations with them to truly understand and to truly be able to give them a space for safety, for
mm.
community, and for healthy connection.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I am very sorry. Like it's and you know, like I think sometimes when we make statements of apology, people is
Mm,
like, "We don't want your pity," and it's not pity.
mm,
It's just
mhm,
like,
yeah,
I'm sorry that you have so much that you have to
mm,
navigate in your life,
yeah, yeah,
and no one not many people understand.
mm, mhm, yeah,
That
yeah,
is what I'm sorry about, and the energy that it takes to even have to pull yourself and constantly fight this
mm,
battle, this unseen battle, and I say unseen to other people who don't know what your life
mm,
entails and what
mhm,
it looks like day to day.
yeah, yeah,
Gosh.
yeah. Yes, I appreciate the way that you said that.
Yeah, yeah. Whew, okay. So, right, so there are generational what did you say?
Yeah,
Generational
yeah, so we get, like, it's passed down, like, behaviorally and by the soma, like, it can be literally carried in our genetics. A lot of, so from Auschwitz and the Holocaust, a lot, well, not a lot, but there were some reports of people who just couldn't go in the shower. It's like they would have a panic attack if they went in the shower, or just showers were very triggering. And I don't think it was like a neurodivergent sensory thing.
uh,
Um, but yeah, it's like there's this body memory of fear around the showers, where they would the gas people, gas Jews and stuff. And yeah, it's like studies kind of show that these kind of body memories can go back 11, 14 odd generations and still be affecting us. Yeah.
and how do we even learn about that?
Mhm. Well, animal studies mainly, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
Animal studies.
Mm,
So it sounds like anyone could be existing in this life, in this
mm,
time,
mhm,
and their pain, their physical illness, their concerns, or anything that's impacting them in any great, massive way is
mm,
also connected to past generation for
mm.
it could be decades ago that is
Oh,
impacting them
more than
today.
more than hundreds. Yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, so it's like, whatever our cultural history is, it's almost like you could look back and see what famines there have been, what wars there have been, what oppression there's been over the last few hundred years, and it's like we carry that with us. And yeah, for I guess transracial adoptees, it's like we've been severed from that, and yeah, it can be a whole journey to kind of process what our ancestral trauma is when we're so far apart from it. Yeah, it's, but in a way, it is fascinating how the body works, how it can carry this, how our genes can encode fears around things that our ancestors have gone through.
Yes. I love this conversation, by the way. And this conversation just really incite a reminder of the importance of connecting to community.
Mhm,
And having and to be honest, I want to say connecting to a knowing of who we are, a knowing of who our family is,
mhm,
because there's so much generation of things, and I don't see it as much. I read about it, and when I read about it, I get very like sad
mhm,
when people write about once I lived in a village, and in our village, everyone would go by the water, and that's where we would learn. And it was
yeah.
so peaceful. People don't get up, like even the way that they navigate the kitchen. Like the women are in the kitchen and they sing and they dance and they laugh, and then the men is in on the farm and they're plowing and they're digging, and the children are, the children are existing in childhood.
Mm, yeah.
And it's like when I'm looking out my window now, and I'm just looking out my window just to think about the fact that a lot of us, and I know that life leads to this, and how systems are leads to this, but just to freely express this thought is to say that we live in so much seclusion, in
Mm,
isolation.
mm.
Like, I'm in this room, somebody else is in another room. I'm in this room thinking about the some insane things with no one to really, like, express it
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah,
And s
yeah.
and so there's a lot about individuality, for people who exist
Mm,
naturally in community,
yeah,
and it
yeah,
bothers me,
yeah,
and it
yeah.
bothers me a
I
little
think it's
bit.
human nature to be in community, right? Even though we need our alone time, like, don't get me wrong, but like we're built to connect with others. We're built to be around other human beings. Like
Yeah,
that's our genetic makeup. Yeah, whether
yeah,
you've been trauma or carry trauma rather.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean we all
So
carry trauma.
but yeah, which makes a lot of sense why adoptee can go through so many can I say struggles?
Mm, like,
Yeah,
yeah, and
does that
yeah,
work? If there's another word that, you think
yeah,
would work best, just let me know. So, it makes sense that adoptees can go through so many struggles, because there's so many changes and still trying to, identify a space that is, open to
mm,
the transition of their
mm,
experiences.
yeah,
So if someone is an is a what is it? Adopted parent, like, what do you call them?
mm,
Adopt
adopt,
parents?
yeah, adopted parents. Yeah,
Adopted parents. Um, don't adopt people that you don't know don't have the capacity. I'm
uh,
sorry. S
yeah,
Stop
yeah,
doing that. If you
yeah,
cannot create the
yeah,
space for people and for
mm,
children to
mm,
really get to know themselves,
yeah.
cut it out. But I know this is society, and they're
Yeah.
gonna do whatever they wanna do for the sake of their own benefit, which
Mhm, mhm.
frustrates me, but
Oh, yeah,
let's stay
I
focused.
could go on and on about the what I think about the adoption system and advocate for, yeah, not adoption and yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna come
We can leave
there's
that.
something I keep
We
wanting to
can
say. I'm
leave
gonna come
that.
back. So Kellan, how does how does somatic therapy differ from talk therapy? I know that earlier in the conversation you mentioned that you're not a fan of talk therapy and that culture.
Mm.
Is that what
Not that
you said?
I'm not a fan of talk therapy in and of itself. Like, I think talking can be so beneficial. Like, it's what got
Uh-huh.
me where I am. I think we need to talk. Sometimes it's just great to talk to people, right? Like, sometimes
Mhm.
it helps to have someone to hold space for you and talk to them. Um, but I think a lot of what we do in our society is, yeah, we call it like neck up. We're always working with the brain. We're intellectualizing. We're analyzing. We're really kind of stuck in our thoughts, and that kind of overthinking process can be a sign that we're under feeling, and like our nervous system is trying to avoid the emotions and the sensations that naturally come up. And so when we start talking about pre-verbal, like early life trauma, um, ancestral trauma, inherited trauma, a lot of that is held in the nervous system. A lot of it's in our like fascia, our muscles, in the way we carry ourselves. And when it's like you intellectually know something or you want something, and it's like, I'm like, yeah, like this is what I want, and then you go and do it, and then it's like your body like screams at you, and it's like, no, this doesn't feel good.
Mm,
you know
mhm.
that that's the held trauma in the body, and talking about that often is very limited in how much how much it can process that, especially when our trauma, or what the events that cause the trauma in our body, originated very early on in life. Because when these parts of us are triggered, it's like they have the capacity and the resources that we had at that age. So if, especially, I'm going to talk about adoptees again, like our a lot of our attachment wounds and this lack of agency came about from when maybe we were born, just after, maybe before, maybe in the womb, maybe in utero. And those parts of us, when they're triggered, it's like they didn't have words, they didn't have a rational developed prefrontal cortex. They just had sensation. They just had the body and, maybe screaming, crying, or not doing either of those and shutting down. So what I do is I combine, I'll be talking. We don't, it's not just, we have to talk and
Mhm.
but yeah, it's kind of blending talking and thinking about our patterns and our triggered parts, and then combining that with really delving into the body in a way that, yeah, in kind of like measured doses, in the rate that people's nervous systems have the capacity for, to really process what's in the nervous system and what the body's holding. And the
Mm.
body does that very well. It's not like I'm a fixer for it. It's not like
Yeah.
I'm giving answers or, like channeling out of them. I'm really holding space so that their body can do it in the way that it knows how to,
Yeah.
but we've we've forgotten how to access that.
Mm. So, what are some of the tools, or what are some of the practices that are implemented to assist while holding the space for them to start to release the histories that are held in the body?
Yeah. So a lot of what I do works with the nervous system and like with the understanding of something called polyvagal theory, in that we don't just have, like our rest and digest and fight and flight, like we kind of learn in school ages, but that actually the nervous system operates on quite a few like different levels. And so a lot of the kind of tools that I'll be using involve being able to work with that. So the breath, for example, is a great tool where we can upregulate the nervous system and be more activated, which might help things come to the surface. But then we've also got like down regulating breaths
Mhm.
that can help ground our bodies and like restore safety to the nervous system. We've got orientating, like orientating to our surroundings. A lot of what I do involves resourcing. So finding internal cues of safety that people can pull upon and anchor themselves into the now, into the present, into safety. And so when we're using those things, it can help to complete, we call it completing like the cycle of trauma. So it's like we're holding this trauma and it's almost like there's a loop that needs to be completed, and the loop wants to find safety.
Yeah.
And so we're traumatized because when something happened to us, we didn't ever find safety in that event.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like that loop is just hanging, it's just there. And so that's what my work involves a lot of, is completing that trauma loop so
Oh,
that we're no longer, and we do this a lot.
yeah.
We recreate the situ as a similar event to what caused that trauma. So, for example, um, with people who've been through, say, sexual assault, for example,
Mhm.
you often find that they will experience it again and again, or abuse, abusive relationships. And it's like they
Mhm.
mentally are like, I deserve more than this. I don't want to go back into that.
Yeah.
And yeah, they will attract that situation back into their lives until this trauma loop has been
Oh,
completed, because it's wanting that resource.
yeah. Okay. So, ooh, which makes me think, I wonder how many people in society is stuck in a loop
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just cycling through the experience over and over, and
yeah.
how painful that is. And it makes sense that in addition to that, so many things is just starts to accumulate and keep storing, storing, storing.
Mm, mhm,
I read something somewhere that says that the mind is even in loop. It only
mm.
thinks about the same thing every single day, the same thing. And it makes sense because a lot of us have a lot of the same routines every day.
Mm, mhm,
You know, some routines have a higher benefit and a low chaos. And
mm,
some has
mhm,
like a high chaos and a low benefit.
mm,
Some
mhm.
people can probably find the middle to
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
like, being in this rotating cycle. That's why, like, I work with couples, and
Mm,
oftentimes they're stuck in. We talk about gridlock. It's like
right.
that's it, and don't know how to go out. Just like things are good for a couple days, then 2 weeks later, argument,
Mm,
same thing. Then things are good, then they make up. Things are good for a couple of weeks again. 2 weeks later,
yeah.
argument, and it's the same thing. And I don't think a lot of us realize how stuck we are, and that's including
Yeah.
me, how
Yeah.
stuck
Oh,
we are in having the living the same.
yeah. I've got plenty of loops still to to
And
come.
and so I think it's really cool that we're all, trying to figure out how to get out of those loops,
Mm,
but, I can see how it's so important with what you do, Kellen, and assisting, those that you work with in recognizing the loop. First,
mm,
let's
mhm, mhm.
using breath as your main source of tool to assist with that and recognizing it and then pulling out, finding. And so is it that you just guide them through these breath work and the tool and the loop so that they are able to find the exit and find the direction and the path in order
Yeah.
to come. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like yeah, really consider myself as a guide in it because I think everyone's bodies has so much innate wisdom when we can really lean into it that my job is really to allow people to feel safe to access that. I'm not telling them where the exit is. And I don't know if it's so much of an exit as, yeah, it's more of a completion of that trauma loop rather
Completion.
than
Okay.
getting out of it. I think a lot of what I do is really just holding space for that trauma and those traumatized parts in us to actually be there. Like we're not trying to get rid of them. We're actually holding
Yeah.
space for them so that they can feel safe to maybe act in a different way than they've always known how to act. And I think something that you were saying earlier as well brought up the thought of like, yeah, when we get stuck in these loops, it's like our nervous system finds safety in what's familiar. So even if the familiar is abusive relationships and maybe spending all your money and always being in debt, like if that's what's familiar, even though your brain's like, got to get out of this, know exactly how to get out of this, the
Yeah.
nervous system's like, this is what we know. This is safety, and so it will keep us there until it feels safe to experience something different, until we can embody a different way of being.
My mind just started to run on the fact that, and this could probably sound just to talk to you, but my
Mm.
mind is running on the fact like how much we can, how much we've all been in a sense of being imprisoned,
Yeah.
and I start to get like very feel the word that's coming to my mind, and I'm not sure if I agree with it totally, but a sense of like helplessness
Mm.
when it
Mhm.
comes to something like that, just to, and it's not just to my, like, I know it's kind of like put your mask on first, put your
Mhm.
mask on first before you try to help anybody else. And I guess I'm also just looking at it from like a community, like
Mm.
all of us, and just to see like we're all trying to figure out how to get to a space of completion in the cycle.
Mhm.
And just seeing how many things and how many barriers, I can imagine, like, even just based off what you said so far about
Mhm.
trans adoptee
Mm.
and the amount of barriers that can
Mm.
come up.
Mhm.
You mentioned, being adopted,
Mm.
finding a new family or having a new family, and this is just talking about the a decent route, right? This is
Mm.
just one part of it. And finding a family and then a new cycle,
Mm.
um, and just, like, navigating so many different cycles of their lives,
Mm.
and one minute there's this cycle, next minute there's another, next minute there's another, and it's like there's always a hurdle. There's
Mm.
always a hurdle that's coming, and we don't know if the hurdle is gonna be, like, super close where we have to figure out how to go over it, or, you
Yeah.
know, how to build the muscles, build the strength in certain parts of our bodies, or
Mm.
just, like, experience. And yeah, it's just a lot. I felt quite overwhelmed from
Mm,
just thinking about like what you're sharing and just thinking about how many devices
mm,
are in our lives, that's hindering the possibility and how we all just participate in all of it.
yeah.
And that can feel a little helpless.
Mm, yeah. 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 I think that's, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you have to offer a lot of compassion and grace for like where we're at and what we've been doing, and just that like we get to take it in like little 1%, you know? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Small steps. Small steps.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about root cause a little bit.
That's
Uh,
actually where I'm gonna go.
cool.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
before we do that, just like what we were talking about before, like just I guess the acknowledgement that actually like this whole like cycle breaking thing, like healing, like a deeper healing is it's like heavy, it's like hard, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of people aren't called to it, and that is maybe okay. Like I don't think everyone's called to it, and I think part of healing is like where we have to meet people where they're at, and it's hard sometimes, but I think sometimes we have to like accept that some people just aren't cycle breakers. Like,
Yeah, yeah, 'cause, the reality is that you're right. Like, everybody isn't cycle breakers. Some people are meant to hold up the cycle.
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm,
yes, even, I'm not gonna hold you, 'cause when you walked out for a second, I was just like, "Shit, this this is tough," you know? Um, and I feel like my brain is still trying to comprehend a lot of what you shared,
yeah,
because it's a lot, and,
mhm, mhm, yeah, yeah.
kudos to you. Kudos for you for being a part of the gang of cycle
You
breakers.
as well. What you
Like
doing?
and, I'm so happy that, um, we we all have niches that
Mhm,
we can support people in, because I don't know. I think that everybody is just made, like how some people are child therapists,
mhm, mhm,
some people who are, they aid with people who are struggling with substance use.
mm, mhm,
You aiding with individuals that are navigating multiple worlds,
mm,
multiple. And I
mhm,
say, not that other therapists don't, but like
mm,
just based off this conversation, you're working with not just people who are adopted,
mm,
you're also
mhm,
working with people who are transitioning.
mm, mhm, mhm.
That's pretty broad.
Yeah.
Like it, and I don't think that it's quite as easy to just talk about it as a whole. I think there has to be some kind of compartmental just to make
Mm,
sure that what is going on is giving space to create relaxation, healing, safety.
yeah.
Well done. Well done to that. So, let's get into root cause.
Yeah.
One of your primary modalities is root cause
Mhm.
therapy, and I'm very curious how you implement this modality, while also working with individual trans adoptee
Yeah.
and the others in the queer community.
Yeah. So root cause is actually a pretty recent addition. Like I've been training in it and practicing and stuff. And it's basically a blend of different things where, and I also want to say, like, I feel like for listeners, it's like, there's so much emphasis sometimes on modality, and really it's just like space holding is like the most important part of our healing. But this, yeah, this kind of blend of things I found just so powerful in my own life. I was like, I need to take this and give it out to people, because like I was saying before, like these beliefs that we form from the narratives that we tell ourselves about what happened to us when we were younger a lot of time, they really dictate your life. And I think it was Carl Jung, perhaps, that said, um, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will like rule your life and
Yeah.
your fate. And so with this root cause therapy, we really get into what those limiting beliefs, subconscious limiting beliefs are, and then we allow the body, the nervous system, the mind to access the event, like the root, literal root of that subconscious limiting belief, and then we process it. Like we process it somatically, like we really feel it through, and allow that energy to be metabolized, so that actually our kind of like higher thinking or higher self, like whatever resonates with people, can come through, and we can see with clarity like what actually happened. And yeah, it's crazy how much
Mhm.
one, like our beliefs will shape our reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry. God.
No, go ahead. Continue, please.
Yeah, and just from my own kind of healing experience with it, I was working around being able to receive, and it's crazy just how much that changed my life when I did that, because I felt before like I really struggled to receive like money, love, and after doing this, it's like that connection was so much better because I could actually receive the
Um,
love that people had for me, and also money. Like, um,
yeah.
my, but yeah, how much I was earning like tripled, like almost instantly, like afterwards, because it was just like the energy I was putting out was like I can receive this energy exchange now for the work I do, whereas before I was blocking that. And yeah, it was crazy. And that was like that was one belief and that changed all that for me.
Yeah. Wow. So you talked to us, you just shared about like, getting people to access their limiting belief systems, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You used the phrase making the unconscious conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very difficult task because a lot of some of these unconscious stuff is so stored and locked away.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very curious about how does one gain access to
Yeah.
those?
Yeah. So, I mean, for starters, I think people know when they're ready for this work. It's almost like I think sometimes their unconscious is already kind of coming into the conscious themselves, like in daily life, where they're like, oh, I have these repeating patterns. And so I think there's that awareness that you can get from things like talk therapy. But then we do something called muscle testing and like pendulum testing. And so when we believe something to be true, we generally like our muscles will be more contracted, because it's like our body's like, yes, like this is truth. And when we believe something to be untrue, if we say it, our muscles generally like kind of will like lean back or sag or will get weaker. And so we can use this to our advantage to kind of see what the body actually believes.
Oh,
And so yeah, we do a lean test, which can really reveal. So people, I'll kind of guide people through saying different beliefs, and we can target different beliefs to like what they want to work on. And so it might be like, for example, with adoptees, there might be a lot around like I fear rejection, or I'm not lovable, or these kind of things. Um, it's safe to be myself. It's safe to receive,
yeah.
and yeah, and depending on kind of what the body does in a very safe kind of environment, can reveal what beliefs are in there, like in the system.
Wow. Wow. Okay. It's so interesting. The body holds the secret,
Mm,
holds the information. It also tells the secret and tells the information.
yeah.
It sounds like once we get more attuned to our bodies and reconnecting to our bodies, then Is that what it is, like, once that starts to happen, or is there more to that?
Yeah, so it does definitely create, sorry, it does definitely require a level of safety to do
Safety.
that kind of testing. Because if the body doesn't feel safe, it's not gonna lead. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
gonna
yeah. It's
reveal
like
those.
mm,
So that, you know, that is my job. That is like my
okay.
job, to create a space where people feel held, and non-judged and safe enough to for their
Sure.
body to show us, to yeah, to show it the in quotation marks secrets.
Yeah, you know, so yeah, primarily safety is, safety, security, comfort,
Hmm.
ease, peace, is a huge part. Compassion is a huge part of the space that needs to be created for people to get to a space of wanting to reveal, right? And not just reveal to another person, but also especially to reveal to oneself.
Mm.
Um, because I think, like, is it the same? So the body holds tension, right? Is
Mm.
the tension also a part of the revealing? Like when I'm
It
holding
definitely can be. It can show us, yeah, perhaps maybe the body tenses around certain subjects, around certain words, around certain things if we're imagining them, and that can show us where our triggers are. Yeah, and just the fact that you carry tension can be a big indicator, of that you're carrying some sort of trauma in the system. Yeah, so like chronic back pain, chronic shoulder issues,
yeah.
you know, all of these kind of unexplained pains that aren't caused by injuries or like a condition going on. Yeah, and
Oh,
most chronic pain is that. Studies show, I think it's something like 80-90% of chronic pain is not caused by an injury or a condition. Yeah,
yeah.
I can't remember the study, but it's out somewhere. Someone can look it up.
Look it up and find it. Um, do your research. Okay, so root cause is navigating along with the person, guiding them to recognize an area in their lives, unlocking it, opening up to it, exploring it. It's almost like magnifying it each and every time,
Yeah,
um, until getting to a space of acceptance.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think we naturally kind of cultivate a lot of acceptance around what's happened and like the feelings that go along with that, with
Okay,
this, but
yeah,
with all my work really, it's holding space for that. Like we're not trying to judge it or get rid of it, because I think that's a really common thing that people do, isn't it? Like we're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Like we try and rationalize the feeling
yeah.
out of us, and it's like, actually, what if you just hold space for that, even if it makes zero sense to you
This
rationally?
is
Yeah,
really what is
yeah,
that holding space? I think a lot of times, I don't know if we know, but it makes sense that until we learn the tools or
mm,
until we learn to understand what's holding that space is, it gets a little bit easier, a lot easier to do so. I think you mentioned earlier how in the beginning, meditation was something that needed some improvement. And now you're at a space where you feel more comfortable being still and being in a state of meditation.
yeah,
Um, okay, so it sounds like one of those, like the more comfortable you start to get with the information, because the space would allow it,
mm,
then and slowly the body will start to just reveal that to you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like the body will bring up what it's ready for.
Body. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you think, you'd like to share about
Mm.
root cause therapy?
Yeah, you know, I was talking about that we look at beliefs, but what's and this is answering one of kind of your questions that you asked me
Mm,
in the email before.
mm,
But what's kind of surprising is that when we kind of go into one of these limiting beliefs, it can change a lot of other beliefs. So like I was working with a trans adoptee, actually, and they were working around a belief that they needed to struggle, And that led us to some really interesting places because, you know, a lot of people go to like childhood events or in utero events, and
Mm.
that's very revealing as well. But this person, they went to past lives. They kept going back to like previous lives
Wow.
on their timeline. And you know, is it? I love the concept of past lives now these days. I'm a
Yeah.
big, you know, believer in them. But also, if people don't resonate like that, you know, it's kind of like maybe it's the brain's way of accessing the trauma
Yeah.
in a way that is safe for them.
Yeah.
But either way, yeah. So that we were working on this "I need to struggle" belief, and when we tested it again, when we saw each other next, you know, that showed that it had been integrated, and they were feeling much more able to go about their life without
Yeah.
needing to create struggle. But also like really random beliefs altered as well, like trusting men. And I
Yeah.
was like, where did that one come from? But sometimes it's like we don't know how the subconscious has linked all these narratives
Mm.
and beliefs together, but it can change completely different beliefs in the system. And yeah, like when we go into a past healing, often, you know, 4 or 5 beliefs
Mm.
can shift, with just like kind of pinning into one belief. Yeah, which is
Ah.
fascinating. But a lot of that is the integration. You know, the integration is like 80-90% of the work.
Okay. Yeah, which makes a lot of sense, the integration. So, Kellen, what are some of the misconception around these practices?
Yeah. So I think a big one around just healing in general and nervous system work is that regulation, like a healthy nervous system is calm. And like, no, like
Mhm.
calmness is not our goal, or it shouldn't be at least. Like, imagine if I'm being abused. Imagine if someone is attacking me, and
Yeah.
I'm calm, like I'm chill.
Yeah.
Like that's not a healthy nervous system. That's not regulation.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
dysregulation. You know, if I'm calm and someone's attacking me, like physically, verbally, emotionally, like that's that's dysregulation. That's like shut down. That's like,
Yeah,
you know, I'm repressing myself to
yeah,
what that would happen. You know, I think nervous system regulation and healing, it involves being able to embody an appropriate reaction to what's going on, like a proportional reaction. So like when things are safe, when we are in safety, you know, our homes, there's no threat going on. Like, yeah, it's great for us to be calm. But that healthy regulation also involves getting stressed sometimes, getting angry, you know, when people cross our boundaries. It involves feeling really sad, it involves grieving, but then being able to move through those rather
yeah,
than getting stuck in certain nervous system states. And I think that is a belief that keeps people chasing calmness and bypassing and just being like, I'm gonna meditate all day because
yeah,
that's where it's at. Like, like if you're
yeah.
meditating all day, when are you living? Like, um, so yeah, I think that's one of the biggest ones out there. And
Ah,
yeah, and I think with breath work as well, like the way I work now is so much more nervous system informed than when I first kind of got into breath work, because a lot of the time people will chase that really intense, like the psychedelic breathwork type thing, where it's really, really intense and they're going deep into their trauma and they're like kicking and screaming and all of this trauma is coming up. But that can be too much for the nervous system. And actually, the nervous system grows and heals the best when we push it, yeah, but we stay within this kind of window of tolerance and
yeah.
where it has capacity for. Because if we keep pushing it out of it, we're kind of recreating trauma for it. We're
That's
doing
what I'm
what
thinking.
life has always done to it, which is
Yeah.
push it beyond what it's capable of. So that is the challenge sometimes in not doing that and rushing, and that's a big thing for me as well. Like rushing healing, I think, you know, as healers are, we're so into what we're doing, and we're so called to heal, and we're so called to cycle break that I think sometimes we can get stuck in like, oh, I'm not there yet, and
Yeah.
that's one of my areas that I'm, yeah, gently focusing on this year.
Yeah.
It's being able to slow down, and, really lean into, I'm healing, but I'm lovable and good enough
Yeah.
where I'm at, and I
Yeah.
don't need to rush the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you're here for that, the things are gonna come. Yeah. Right.
Oh yeah, things come.
They're gonna show up. They're gonna show up.
Life is
Uh,
always miraculous.
they always something about the way that this thing is playing. But and thank you for sharing that. Um, thank you for talking about how emotional regulation and what dysregulation can also look like.
Mhm.
Because I think I'm glad you said that because sometimes as and even myself, I have to reflect a little bit to see if I do that and if there
Mm,
needs to be a change in that approach. Sometimes we're like, you're either regulated or dysregulated, and dysregulated means that you're annoyed all the time, da 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 da
mm,
da 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 da. And it's like this or that, this or that, this or that, and
yeah.
not quite really knowing how to sustain the balance or just figuring out what it is. Like, I remember this one time I got angry
Mm,
and I was so angry, and I was like, "No, but I need to be calm. Like, I'm not supposed to be angry. Why am I?" And something was like, "No, you deserve to be angry. Like,
yeah.
this is a moment that requires you to be angry. So be
Yeah.
angry. Express that." And I'm not gonna lie, I said some things, I did some
Mhm.
things, and then afterwards I was like, "Huh."
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I feel like I fed whatever needs to get fed.
Yeah.
And then I was able to then cool down and reflect and to see,
Mhm.
would I want to do anything different from here? So I think
Yeah.
that was really cool.
Yeah.
So thank you for touching on that. I really appreciate you vocalizing what that can also look like.
Yeah. No worries. No worries. And yeah, that's a good point that you brought up there with like going into that anger, because I think
Yeah.
maybe it's a misconception. It's like people think, I mean, I used to be the same, like I try and get out and like of anger and stuff. And actually sometimes the best way to regulate is to go into that state, to go into whatever we're trying to not feel.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And anger is
Cool.
literally, I feel like I've been on such a journey with my own anger, but yeah, really like the part of us that loves us the most, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't
Mm.
know. I feel like, oh, another cycle breaker is proud of me. Okay, thank you.
External validation.
Okay, nothing's wrong with a little bit of external validation every
No.
now and again. So, as we're about to close out,
Mhm.
I absolutely want to say thank you so much, Kellan, for everything that you've shared with us, for sharing the way that you have existed in this space and the compassion and the support and the safety that you aim to create for those who will, you know, click your link or meet you face to face.
Mhm.
So but before we close out, I have one last question for you. It's a
Mhm.
personal question. What
Okay.
is it that you do specifically to make sure that you are in the space that you need to be? And I'm not
Mhm.
gonna say in a good space or what is it
Mhm.
that you do to make sure that you're in a space that you need to be in order to provide the care and the intentional care
Mhm.
that you want to for those you serve?
Yeah, that's a good question because yeah, I think it's something that therapist space holders like it can be a struggle, right? It can be a
Mhm.
challenge. And I think my thing with space holding, being able to space hold for people is I have to hold space for myself. And like a lot of it. Like so
Yeah.
much of it's like I'm holding so much space for myself, like almost either equally as much as, if not more, space for myself as I am for others. Because if I can't do that, then I'm depleting myself.
Yeah.
And when we hold space for people as well, it's not like a one-way thing. Like they act as catalysts for our own growth. They
That's,
might bring up something that you're like, oh, that hit me, like that
that's true.
we've got parts that are triggered by their parts, and it's such a journey when you enter that like therapeutic relationship with someone.
Mhm.
There's a lot of just processing and doing your own work. I
Yeah.
think to be able to space hold from that place where you can do it as compassionately and gracefully as I'd really like to.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
but yeah, that is what I'm doing, or at
yeah.
least trying to do best I can. It's
Yeah.
not a perfection, is it?
Yes. So uh thank you for sharing that, because you are absolutely right. To hold space for other people, we have to know to hold space for ourselves.
Mhm,
We have to be able to give ourselves those compassionate languages so it doesn't feel strange to to share it to other people.
mhm.
So, Kellan, thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much again for the work that you have been doing. And I pray that your feet lead you in the direction at all times that you need to be in order to break whatever cycle there is for you to break. I pray that you also exist in a easeful state at a slow pace as you're learning to continue this work, because we don't need you to get tired. So continue to be the bridge for those who are coming for you, and how they will get to the other side, and how that you will guide them to the other side. So thank you very much for being here.
No, thank you very much for having me. I obviously wish you all the same. And yeah, just thank you for being so easy to talk to. Like it's been great. Like I've just been happily rambling away. So
Thank you so much. Until next time.
yeah, thank you for having me.